welcome back, guys. Today we're covering Cartesian Dualism, but before we jump into content, just want to remind you guys, there's an iPad there. I am recording this lecture. I am uploading it to YouTube. So if you guys mind your name being up there, you just try not to say each other's names and stuff, right? So yeah. First of all, I want to recap from our last session. So remember how I talked about we have this qualia, subjective experience. And then on the other side, there is this brain stuff that is kind of related to it. But we found it difficult. Hi, welcome. We found it difficult to kind of explain the subjective experience from the neuroscientific brain stuff. Well, one of you guys asked a good question, right? He said, I don't see this difficulty. Using the ramen example, if you guys still remember, right? When I put the ramen in my mouth, my tongue sending X signal into my brain, and my brain is going to process it in this certain way. He said, well, if our neuroscientists who are very smart have figured out how did the brain process the information, we should be able to explain experience. Well, to kind of explain the gap between neuroscience and qualia a bit more clearer, I stole an example from the famous philosopher Thomas Nagel. So what is it like to be a bat? Well, what's so special about bats? It is that they can kind of perceive ultrasound similar to how we perceive light. So our eyes normally would receive lights coming from the outside and send signal to our brain, process it, and then we'll have a representation of the outside world, right? Bats are similar to this, except they are using ultrasound to create that representation. Well, think about it. Do you know what is it like to feel the representation of ultrasound? Do you know what is it like?
Yes.
You can kind of guess, but you wouldn't like definitively know what is it like, right? Are you a bad DJ?
No.
No, right? So
Some people have trained to get echolocation.
Really?
Some blind people.
I've heard the theory that they don't hear. They can hear things. They can, when they are able to use echolocation, it's like they can see general things like texture or text. They can't see flat. So it sounds.
But for the people who are getting trained for echolocation, they are still using the auditory signal and they are trying to infer something out of it, right? This is quite different from what the bats are doing. They have like this special system that construct the representation. And I think we can pretty reasonably say that we don't know what is it like to have the representation. Now imagine if you are a super smart neuroscientist. You know all there is about bat's brain, right? You know how does X neuron fire in such a manner to create this representation of the rock inside the cave. But well, you know what is it like to feel a bat because of this? Well, that probably wouldn't help that much, right? But yet the fact that you know how does the brain of the bat work to create this representation, it doesn't really help you to feel what is that representation like, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So do you guys see the gap between the neuroscientific explanation and the subjective experience?
That might, it's one thing. That might be. Yeah. Their brain's just physically different than ours. It's outside of our comprehension. So totally different.
Yeah.
It's like imagining a like primary color.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can.
It's outside of you.
Even if like there's this other organism that sees another color and you know how does this nervous system work, you still cannot perceive that color. It's a feeling, right? It's a feeling. So that's the recap. Before we jump into Cartesian dualism, I want us to have this sort of foundational skill. It's called premise conclusion logic. What is premise? Well, premise is an idea that we accept as true and we use as a sort of building block of our ideas. Conclusion is what necessarily follows from the premise. An example of that would be premise 1, all humans need to eat. Premise 2, Jeremy is a human. Conclusion, Jeremy needs to eat. Another example, all high school students are smart. I am a high school student and I am smart, right? So hopefully you get the gist of that. Now try to make your own argument.
flowers are beautiful.
Yeah.
Roses are flowers.
Roses are beautiful.
But couldn't we
Exactly.
break it by saying all flowers are beautiful? Sunset is beautiful. Therefore, all sunsets are flowers. That doesn't work.
But then that's three. That's a premise, a premise, a premise, and then
I have one.
Mhm.
All cross-country. Daniels are cross-country. Therefore, Daniels are.
That's a good argument. But you actually lead us nicely into questioning whether an argument is correct or not. So can you repeat your argument? The flowers one?
All flowers are
All flowers are
beautiful.
beautiful. Premise 2.
Sunset is beautiful.
Sunset is beautiful. Yeah.
This sunset is a flower.
Conclusion is sunset is a flower.
we're getting philosophical.
Right?
So
The thing is, yes, flowers and sunset, they have the same property of being beautiful. But does this conclusion necessarily follow, right? Because they have the same property, are they necessarily the same thing? You and I are both males. We both have the property of being males. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you and I are the same person, right?
Also, you can't link properties to properties. Like you can't use a property to link two things as one and the same.
At least not one single property,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah. Say like, black hair, I am.
But
Here.
you just led us nicely into validity. What makes a good argument? Well, there are two components. One is called validity. That means a conclusion must necessarily follow from the premise. So, in this example, premise 1 and premise 2, let's see, if you agree that flowers are beautiful and the sunset is beautiful, both of them are correct. But the problem with this argument is that the sunset, this conclusion here,
Jeremy.
what's up? Welcome. The problem with this argument is that the conclusion doesn't necessarily follow from the premise. So this is not a valid argument. However, this is a sound argument because we define soundness, which is another component of a good argument, by saying, are the premises true? So that's a pretty good example of being sound but not valid. So here's another example about validity. Premise 1, every kind of Chinese food is delicious. Premise 2, Jeremy likes delicious food. And conclusion, Jeremy likes every kind of Chinese food. Notice here, premise 1 may not be correct. Some Chinese food may be horrendous, right? But, if premise 1 and premise 2 are correct, this conclusion, it must appear, it must be true. So therefore, this is a valid argument. The soundness, whether this premise 1 is correct, can be questioned. Yeah, you can say that. Hey, welcome. So here's soundness, right? Premise 1, every human is a snake. Premise 2, Jeremy is a human. And therefore, conclusion, Jeremy is a snake. Notice here, it is obviously not sound. Why? Because,
Snake as in like personality-wise.
yeah,
Again, that should.
Yeah.
right? Because the premise 1 is incorrect, therefore it's not sound. But, is it valid?
Yeah. Because Jeremy.
Using that logic.
Yeah, if you were to go with that, oh no, so that's not.
Is it valid?
Valid.
It's not valid
Why is it not valid?
because you can't. One of the statements isn't true that you're linking. If you're going by that logic, it's valid. But
Yes,
then if
it's
you're
sound.
yeah, I guess it's not sound, but it's valid.
No, I think the other way.
Given the premise 1 is true.
Just,
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Notice,
That makes it sound.
guys,
That teaches a lot, it makes it-
hey, welcome.
Makes it sound.
Yeah.
Validity has nothing to do with the correctness of the premise.
Okay.
We're just saying if both of these are correct,
So it is valid.
must this be true, right?
Oh.
It's a valid argument. It's just not sound. So now, hello? No, so just for those of you who kind of joined us halfway, here's a brief recap, right? So for an argument, there are two components that make it a good argument. Component one, we call it validity. That means if all of the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. This refers to the necessary logical link between the premises and the conclusion. And then there is soundness. Soundness just means, are your premises true? By this example, I was saying, although premise one is incorrect, every human, we're not snakes, right? But if these two premises are true, Jeremy is a snake won't necessarily follow. Therefore, this is a valid argument. Get that?
Yeah, so validity is if you took both statements as true, would the logic work out?
Yeah, if both premises are true, would the conclusion be true? That has nothing to do with whether these two are true.
The example I gave is sound.
This sunflower example?
Yes.
Correct, it is sound but not valid. Sorry? Yeah, that happens for an unvalid argument. So this example, right? All flowers are beautiful. Sunset is beautiful. This doesn't necessarily mean that sunset is a flower. However, these two premises are correct. So this is still sound. It's just that having to accept these two doesn't mean you must accept the conclusion. There's not a necessary logical link there. Therefore, it's not valid. So now, try to construct an argument that is sound but not valid. I'm gonna erase this so you guys don't cheat. Don't cheat, guys. It's a bad habit.
Trains are fast.
Trains are fast.
Cars are fast. Therefore, cars are trains.
Trains are fast. Cars are fast. Cars are fast. Cars are trains. Yep, that's a good example. How about you?
I just need the second half.
All humans love dogs. Likes cats.
That's correct. So all humans are dogs. Sam likes cats. Therefore, Sam likes dogs. Right? Notice premise one and premise two, they might be true, but that has nothing to do with the conclusion. So generally, an argument that is sound but not valid is an argument that has correct premises, but the premise has nothing to do with the conclusion. There's not a necessary logical link there. Just another example, Jeremy plays soccer. Jeremy is a male. Conclusion, Jeremy eats bread, right? They are not related, but they are correct statements. So now with that in our toolbox, we shall go on to Cartesian dualism. Right. It took me quite a while to find this meme picture. I'm really proud of it. I told you not to trust me. So, meditation. Our man was on a mission. Descartes was thinking. What he was trying to do is that he's trying to establish, one, the immortality of the soul, and two, the existence of God. But before he tries to build up his argument, he wants to make sure we have a firm foundation of knowledge. He wants to make sure that whatever we know, it cannot be doubted. Therefore, he can build up towards these two big arguments. So he started to doubt things. He's saying, whatever that can be doubted, we cannot use for these two arguments. The first thing that he found not trustworthy is our senses. So our senses can be deceived. In his meditations, he made this example. He was basically saying, now, currently, I believe from my senses that I'm sitting in my chair writing this meditation in front of a bonfire, say. But I might actually be dreaming. and I'm just lying on my bed in my pajamas, and my brain made this up. Therefore, my senses are not trustworthy. They are faulty. You might say, whoa, I am able to distinguish between my dreaming states and my waking state. Try to ignore this huge chunk for a moment. You might say, I can distinguish whether I'm dreaming, in which my senses are lied to, or I am awake, in which they are not lied to, pretty easily, right? Maybe you can say, I can rationally analyze the things around me, or I can slap myself. But Descartes goes on to make a further argument, saying there might be an omnipotent God. There might be an evil genius that's manipulating your senses and lying to you. So a more modern version of that would be, say, I'm a crazy scientist. I kind of like opened your skull and I put it in a glass jar. I put electrodes on your skull, on your brain, and just feed you a simulation, like in the Matrix, right? So therefore, you believe that you exist in the real world, you're in love, you're eating food or whatever, but in fact, you are just in a jar, right? Your senses may be lied to. Well, I'm not saying that we live in a matrix, guys. I'm not saying there's an omnipotent God that's lying to us. I'm not saying these are likely. I'm just saying our senses can be doubted. So to put that into premise conclusion form, premise 1, our senses can be faulty. Premise 2, knowledge that comes from a possibly faulty source can be doubted, right? Therefore, knowledge through our senses can be doubted. And according to Descartes, since these are knowledges that can be doubted, we cannot use them. It's not trustworthy. But, when I was reading Meditations, I was sort of asking this question. So, Mr. Descartes, you are denying that our senses are trustworthy. But if they are not trustworthy, what is true? What exists? Because nearly every knowledge comes from my senses. Even the physics knowledge that I learned from class, right? I kind of listen to them through my ear and I see them through my eyes. So they still came from my senses. So if I cannot trust my senses, what can I trust? What can I trust? Guys, think about it.
Trust things that have been over and over.
They repeated it.
Yeah, past if the experiment has been done over and over and over again, it's invisible.
But the thing is, when you're how do you observe the consequence?
Like how do you view the result?
Yeah,
I see
it is through your senses. Therefore,
my thoughts.
Maybe keep that in mind. Simple logic. So still, your thoughts, right, is a part of your mind. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what Descartes thinks. So, what he goes on to say is, if I am being lied to by an evil God, if I am a brain in a jar, I still need to be a thinking being for me to be able to perceive that lie, right? Even if somebody is telling this lie to me, there still needs to be this me for that.
Could your me be like a lie? Like your fundamental thinking processes are like tampered with, in the way that your senses are being tampered with?
Our fundamental thinking process might be doubted, right? But the thing is, I don't think our existence can be doubted. We will see that in a moment. So, Descartes came up with this. Since I am a thinking being that's perceiving that lie, I think, therefore I am. Right? You might say, whoa, can I doubt this? Can I doubt that I exist? But since you are doubting it, what is doubting? It's a thinking process. And what happens when you think? Yeah.
Whoa.
I think, therefore I am. Make sense?
What does that
Yep.
mean
To be am, like to exist.
Yeah.
Like what do you qualify as like?
Yeah. What do we qualify? What do we mean by existing? That's a very good question, right? What am I? I exist, but what is that existence? Am I a student? Am I a human? A male? A F-22 fighter jet? An aircraft carrier? What am I? The thing is, right? say I know that I am a male, right? How did I know that? I kind of knew that through my observation of myself, my physical properties or whatever. And those observations are ultimately sensory knowledge. I can say that I am a René student, but that ultimately comes from the fact that, say, I see the acceptance letter from René, which is also sensory knowledge. And since we established that sensory knowledge cannot be trusted, the only thing that we can be sure of about us is that we are a thing that thinks. We are a thinking mind. That is the only certain knowledge we have about ourselves. So, after a really, really long bunch of build-up, now, dualism. Here is the knowledge argument. Descartes shifted gears into the question of mind. He goes, premise 1, I know for certain that my mind exists. Premise 2, I am not certain that my body exists. And premise 3, if two things are identical, they must have the same properties. And check out, my mind and my body, according to him, have different properties. One I know exists for certain, the other I do not. Therefore, my mind and body are not identical. Is it sound? Is it valid?
Yeah.
It's valid?
Go back.
Yeah.
I think that argument, that's faulty.
Yeah.
I mean, think of two things that are identical.
Yeah.
Just imagine two coffee cups that are identical. One is in front of me, and one is hypothetically in the room next door. I am certain that this one is here, but I am not certain that that one is there. But we said they're identical.
Yeah.
So that is, it doesn't follow that because two things are identical, but I'm certain of one and not of the other, then they must not be identical.
Or,
I mean,
although their property of position.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess.
that is-
If it's two mics that are like inside of one another, exactly the same.
Yeah, I guess if the property of
Yeah.
position is one of the properties.
That's a spatial point of view, not.
Let's look at the premise 3 he used here, right? Just keep this in mind. We call this the Leibniz law. It's saying if two things are the same, they must have the same properties. Here's one implementation of this Leibniz law.
Premise 1, my phone is black. Premise 2, the phone on the desk is blue. I made a typo here, so I forgot the desk part. And conclusion, they do not have the same properties.
Yeah, the phone on the desk, right? Sorry, I made a typo here. And since they have different properties, by Leibniz law, they are different phones. But things goes a bit funky when you add I think, right? Premise 1, I think my phone is black. Premise 2, I think the phone on the desk is blue. But can you conclude that they do not have the same properties? No, why
For
not?
example, you could be colorblind.
Yeah, you can be colorblind.
You could see them and
Yeah.
The phone on the desk could be in the other room and it could
Yeah.
be red.
I might have a faulty memory, or you might be naughty that you changed my phone into a blue color. You stole from paintings from the art house, right? So this conclusion is no longer certain. Therefore, we can no longer employ Leibniz law. But for now, right, the key point of Descartes' problem is that once you add I think, you're not talking about the properties of the object. It's your perception. And it might not be accurate. In this case, my memory may be faulty. Therefore, you can no longer employ Leibniz law. Well, if you are an advocate of Descartes and you're stubborn, maybe you still want to give I think a chance, right? So let's use that to construct an argument. I can doubt that I made this presentation, recall the crazy evil god or crazy genius that can lie to me. I can doubt that. And premise 2, I cannot doubt that I exist. Conclusion, I am the maker of this presentation has different properties. And according to Leibniz law, it is certain that I am not the maker of this presentation, right? I'm pretty sure this conclusion is pretty absurd, right? I made this presentation.
You guarantee you're not the maker of the presentation? I don't see
You cannot.
Yeah.
But I cannot guarantee that I am the maker of presentation. But if you are sticking with, I think, you are saying, I can guarantee that Jeremy did not make this presentation, which, is pretty unintuitive to say the least, right? Yeah, exactly. So, right, a modification that would make this conclusion make a bit more sense is that you say, I am the maker of this presentation has different properties in my mind only, not necessarily that they have different properties. So, once again, it is only your perception that is different. So returning to Descartes' argument, I know for certain that my mind exists. I am not certain that my body exists. Therefore, a conclusion that would make more sense is that in my perception, mind and body are different. But this does not mean they are definitely different in the real world. It's just that I have a more complete knowledge, you might say, about the mind that know for certain that it exists. And I'm lacking knowledge about the body that I'm not sure it exists. Yeah, now this argument is valid, right? But not the original one. You still cannot say the mind and body are definitely two things. Yeah. So, now that we got the knowledge argument beaten down, Descartes still wants to persuade you of his dualism. So here's another argument. The mind is indivisible by nature. The body is divisible by nature. Like, I can cut off your arm if I want to. I don't want to do that, but just for the sake of argument, right?
Yeah.
Is it true?
Yeah, because if you lost a piece of your brain,
Exactly, right? Is mind necessarily divisible? Here's an experiment. What's happening here is basically, you know how we have two hemispheres of the brain, right? And usually they kind of exchange information through the structure called the corpus callosum, right? And in a seizure patient, due to a certain kind of disease, the doctors have this corpus callosum cut it off. So we can kind of doubt that whether they have two minds. And cognitive neuroscientist has designed this experiment to tease it out. What did they do is that they sort of have this screen. In the middle of the screen, there is this cross. They are asking the subject to look at this cross. And the experimenter is going to show something either on the left or on the right. The image is going to flash very quickly so that...
Your eyes are actually... There is something that prevents your right eye from seeing the left.
There is no physical blockage, but the images flashes very quickly so that when something flashes up on the left, your right eye do not have the time to see that, right? So that's basically what's happening here. And just another piece of information, a bit of a background, voluntary movement and sight would cross. That means the right hemisphere of your brain controls what comes in on the left eye, and it controls what moves on your left body. So, trial 1. An object was shown at the left side only. There's a picture. I only show it to the left eye. See ya. Thank you. And what happened is only the right hemisphere sees it, right? And actually, when I asked the subject, hey man, what are you seeing? The subject does not report seeing anything. But if we allow the patients to reach for the object with their left hand, still the right hemisphere that saw stuff, the subject will still locate the object. So what's happening here? Just another piece of background information. Most people, we are left dominant for speech. That means our left brain hemisphere is controlling speech. So the right hemisphere sees something, reach for that something, right? But our left hemisphere is unaware. So through this trial, it seems like the sensory aspect of the right and the left brain has been divorced, right? Here's another trial. I show a cigarette at the left side, and we ask the object to fetch the most related stuff to the cigarette. So there's a bunch of objects behind the screen. We're asking the subject to fetch for that. And actually, our subject did fetch the most related object, which is the ashtray, right? That's related to the cigarette. But once again, if I ask our subject, have you seen anything? He will say no. So it seems like the cognitive aspect of the mind has also been divorced. When the subject is reaching for the stuff behind the screen, he's thinking, right, which one is the most relevant, which one is the most similar.
Yeah, I mean, me would put it more bluntly, there are two people.
Yeah.
There are two subjects there. One is allowed to speak, and the other one is allowed to grab things.
Yeah.
Kind of scary.
It is. It's really like.
Could you imagine being the one that's
Yeah.
not allowed to say
Yeah.
things?
It is scary. And look at this third trial, right? We give the object visual command on the left side. So first time, we tell the subject to laugh, and the subject does laugh. But when we ask the subject, hey, why are you laughing? He will not say, it's because you told me so. He will say, haha, you guys are really something. You guys are really funny. And trial 2, we are asking the subject to rub. The subject done so. But when we ask him, why are you rubbing? He will say, I feel an itch. It's not because of the command. I'm unaware of it. And similar happens when I tell our subject to assume the boxer position. He will do so, but he will claim that a boxer is coming to my mind just randomly, not because of the command. So it seems like the volitional part of the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere has been divorced. Yes.
So does the sound which comes from the right ear that goes to the other part of the brain?
Yeah.
So could you ask, like,
Oh, sorry. That actually,
if it notice one part of the brain?
both parts of the brain can receive audio signals.
So if you ask it a question, like, do you agree with this statement?
Both brain hears
Say,
it.
write a check mark or an X if you agree or disagree with this statement. Your different sides of the brain could have different answers.
Yes. Yes. Like in this trial, your right hemisphere, it might have the answer, but it won't be really allowed to speak, right? Because your left hemisphere is speech dominant. Yeah. So through these 3 trials, we can see that there's pretty solid evidence that the two minds have been split, right? The sensory aspect is divorced, cognitive aspect is divorced, volitional aspect is divorced. Therefore, the mind is pretty divisible. Even
the difference between splittable and divisible. Because if every time you split it, you're basically creating 2 minds, not 2 half minds, but 2 whole minds.
but still,
It's a different.
Yeah, after devising it enough to then you don't even have. It's not truly divisible. After it's no longer.
Finite amount.
but still, you originally have this one coherent mind. Once you cut up the corpus callosum, there were 2 minds, right? So you can say that's pretty divisible, right? 1 came into 2. They are not 2 like, say, yeah. So
I mean, it's kind of like how many programs can you run on a computer?
so it's kind of like splitting one program into 2 like kind of similar programs.
We're running 2 programs.
Yeah, so I think we are going a bit over time, so I'm going to save this argument to our next session. Thank everybody for participating. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.